Today on Trial Watch, we'll tell you how this woman changed the law to keep violent criminals off the streets.
That's when we started to march in Olympia and to lobby the governor and to get kinds of things going.
He got socialite Klaus Van Bülow off. Can he perform another miracle for evangelist Jim Bakker? An exclusive interview with super lawyer Alan Dershowitz. All this and more today on Trial Watch. Hello, everyone. I'm Rob Weller.
And I'm Lisa Specht. Welcome to Trial Watch.
When Diane Ballasiotes was killed by a repeat criminal, her mother, Ida, set out to spare other parents the same rage and grief. She dedicated her life to doing what the state wouldn't do, protecting the innocent from the guilty. It was just after 5 on September 26, 1988. An attractive 29-year-old advertising executive left her office in downtown Seattle, headed for home. Diane Ballasiotes paid no particular attention to anything or anyone as she walked the 3 familiar blocks to her parking garage. Diane didn't notice the dark-eyed danger stalking her that evening. She couldn't have known their cold stare would be the last to see her alive. Diane's mother, Ida Ballasiotes, remembers how she felt when her daughter disappeared.
To say it was horrible is probably the understatement of the year. You have to understand Diane to realize how we felt. She was so conscientious, it drove you crazy sometimes. If she said she'd be here at 5 o'clock, she'd be here at 4:45. I mean, she was just conscientious and timely to a fault. So we knew something was really wrong, quickly. And we did our own searching, more to keep our own sanity, I think, than anything else.
One agonizing week later, Diane's raped and murdered body was found by the side of the road. But even before that, an important clue had been given police about a man well known to authorities.
Her co-workers had put missing posters in every place around Pioneer Square, stores and offices and office buildings, and they had posted one in the work release facility. A person who worked there saw it on the bulletin board and made the connection that Kane had been missing the same day, which was September 26th. And within a day or two, he reported that to the police. They put out a bulletin on her car, but it was a fluke, really, that he was caught. He was caught attempting to siphon gas from a car into her car.
Jean Raymond Kane, only 2 months out of prison after serving a 12-year sentence for 2 violent sexual attacks on other women. When tried for Diane's murder, Kane's own lawyer wondered how he'd been allowed back in society.
But when psychiatric report after psychiatric report for a dozen years says this man without treatment is just a walking time bomb, he's out on the street doing exactly what everyone has expected he would do, to turn around and say, well, now that he's done it, let's take his life, just seems like they're not doing their job.
With Diane's precious life already having been taken, the Ballasioteses also wondered how officials were doing their jobs. Ida began trying to find out.
I wrote to the governor, I wrote to the head of Department of Corrections, I wrote to the mayor, I wrote to Dukakis and his wife because they were here campaigning. Anybody who I thought might help either A, explain how such an admonition could occur, or what could they do to rectify it.
Though what they had to say was polite, it was certainly unfulfilling.
Oh, we're very sorry, and we realize this is a tragedy, and so on and so forth, but in light of the situation in our criminal justice system, we had to let this person out, and, those kinds of answers. But don't cut any ice with anybody.
Ida wasn't satisfied with the ineffectual responses, and when Trial Watch returns, we'll see how she organized thousands in her quest to keep dangerous criminals off the streets. The sorrow of Ida Ballasiotes at the killing of her daughter was intensified by the knowledge that it should have been prevented. The law couldn't protect her child, so Ida had the law changed. She showed that one woman can make a difference.
Guilty of the crime of aggravated.
The tormented weeks the Ballasiotes' family spent in court, while justice finally caught up with Diane's killer, strengthened their resolve to help others avoid this fate.
At the end of the trial, we had decided as a family that we would try to get some changes made.
I'd like to welcome you all to the memorial for Diane Ballasiotes and other victims of violent crimes.
We had some interviews set up with people just to try to draw their attention to this matter. And about a month after the trial, there was another highly publicized crime in Tacoma where a young child was mutilated by a released sex offender, and it more or less blew the lid off this community. That's when we started to march in Olympia and to lobby the governor and to get kinds of things going.
At last, the response Ida received was more than simply polite. But the governor's choice of action left Ida concerned.
He said, well, I'll form this committee, to which initially we said, big deal, you know what you can do with a committee. In retrospect, it turned out to be the right thing to do. A special session would not have done what the task force was able to accomplish. There were 4 victim representatives on the task force, and I firmly believe that those people being on there made the difference.
The task force was established to find ways to keep mentally unstable criminals behind bars, even if they had served their full sentences.
I think that Ida Ballasiotes certainly played the major role in the formation of the governor's task force and really served as the conscience of the task force. Ida Ballasiotes was an unusual individual. She had gone through this tragedy. She had to work through the pain and loss and suffering that occurred to her family and to her friends. But she was able also not to just be a victim that was angry, but to reach out and be part of creating a group and a process, and was a very unique victim in terms of translating her feelings into something positive.
If I didn't think I was doing the right thing, you couldn't do it. I mean, you're not doing it because you think you're going to get something out of it. That's just not the point.
The point was, find a way to make the streets safer. Prosecutor Malang believes they have.
As a result of the governor's task force, we not only had the hearings, we had a legislative package that provided for longer sentences for the violent rapist, treatment programs, but also provided for a new form of civil commitment to try to reach those type of individuals like Gene Kane. There may be only 20 in the state in a year who had completed their criminal sentence but were still dangerous, and we did not want to have them at large.
Holding sex offenders in a prison-like medical facility for an indefinite period of time after their prison terms is the most controversial part of the new law.
We should not send somebody away to a psychiatric gulag simply because a prosecutor tells a jury he thinks that person is going to commit another crime.
An expert on crime and mental health, Professor LaFond worries about constitutional infringements under the new law, but he realizes he's probably in the minority.
My personal sense is that America would support this sort of indeterminate confinement system. But we ought to remember that the purpose and function of our Constitution is to make sure that all of us have rights that are not subject to majority vote.
Ida's heard from the critics, but mostly she's hearing from families, feeling safer now thanks to her efforts. They've made the still tough times a bit easier to take.
I know people agree. I have people calling me on the phone all the time that I don't know, probably never will meet. And yeah, that helps. If they were knocking me on the head, then it would be harder to do.
Thanks to Ida's efforts, certain types of criminals have to undergo a second trial before being released. In the very first case under the new law, the convict was kept behind bars despite completing his sentence.
Next, a Trial Watch exclusive, an interview with Alan Dershowitz, the man who kept Klaus Van Bulow out of prison. This time, he's out to free Jim Bakker. Alan Dershowitz is a one-man court of last resort. The Harvard law professor engineered a reversal of fortune for Klaus Van Bülow, the socialite convicted of trying to murder his wife. In an exclusive interview, Dershowitz tells Trial Watch how he helped overturn the prison sentence of evangelist Jim Bakker.
And now, here's your host, PTL President Jim Bakker.
Jim Bakker's evangelical empire began to crumble in March of 1987. He was forced to resign as head of the PTL Club, his highly successful TV ministry. His downfall was sex. First, the startling revelation of a sexual encounter with church secretary Jessica Hahn. Then, his own admission that the PTL had paid her $265,000 to keep the affair quiet.
The devil wants to paralyze you.
But Bakker's resignation was just the beginning. Rumors of mismanagement had surrounded the organization for years, and with the Hahn controversy, they only intensified. The federal government began investigating Bakker and the ministry for bilking millions of dollars from the faithful. In 1988, he was charged with 24 counts of fraud and conspiracy. The government accused Bakker of diverting $4 million to support his own lavish lifestyle. Jim Bakker's 6-week trial had a carnival-like atmosphere that evolved into a daily soap opera. One witness collapsed on the stand, and Bakker suffered hallucinations during an anxiety attack. But despite the interruptions, it took the jury just 10 hours to convict Bakker on all counts.
I think it's great. I think he should be responsible. He's been ripping off little old ladies.
But still, the sentencing came as a shock. District Judge Robert Potter, known as Maximum Bob, threw the book at Bakker, giving him 45 years and a $5 million fine. It was 7 times longer than the average sentence for similar crimes. Bakker's wife, Tammy Faye, vowed the fight to clear her husband would go on.
It's not over till it's over.
Bakker's sentence generated a great deal of controversy and eventually became a focal point in his appeal.
When I heard about the sentence, I was outraged.
Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, a champion of civil rights, agreed to argue the sentencing issue before the Court of Appeals. Recently, that 3-judge panel overturned the 45-year sentence, not because it was excessive, but because the judge displayed a personal religious bias against Jim Bakker.
It was a great victory particularly for a more secular view of the judiciary, because the court said, although judges are entitled, of course, to have religious views, they're not entitled to use those religious views in punishing defendants.
Tammy Faye expressed relief over the good news.
I believe if we can get my husband out of prison, that God will vindicate him.
While Bakker's attorneys have a number of strategies from which to choose, Professor Dershowitz believes that religious bias is still an important issue in this case.
We think that if a judge showed religious bias on the day of sentencing, he couldn't be switching off his religious bias like an electric switch. He had to have that same religious bias all through the trial.
Jim Bakker will soon be resentenced, and it's possible he could be sentenced to the time he has already served and walk away from that hearing a free man.
Well, do you believe Jim Bakker should get a lesser sentence? We asked people in Los Angeles this question, and here's some of their responses.
I think that what Jim Bakker did is terrible. I think that it was wrong, but I think that he should be judged like anyone else who is under the same circumstances.
I feel like he should receive no more than 5 years, because people go out every day and kill people now, and they get out, they serve sometimes less than 18 months.
I think he should get, if not the same, a little bit more, considering how he abused people and took advantage of them.
Besides Van Bülow and Bakker, Alan Dershowitz is handling the appeals for Hotel Queen Leona Helmsley, who was convicted of tax fraud, and Jeffrey McDonald, the Green Beret doctor, convicted of murdering his wife and children in the famous Fatal Vision case. We'll be hearing from Dershowitz about those cases on future episodes of Trial Watch. Well, next up on Trial Watch, their record was judged criminally obscene. So how did the rap group beat the rap?
The notorious album from 2 Live Crew, As Nasty as They Wanna Be, certainly lives up to its name. Despite being banned, or because of it, the record sold millions of copies, making 2 Live Crew as rich as they want to be.
Our lyrics are explicit. We talk about sex.
Our society is plagued
and sick
by sexual immorality.
I like the band because they tell the truth.
Moral or not, Luther Campbell and his outrageous Two Live crew say they can be as nasty as they want to be. But their album of the same name spiraled them into a really nasty lawsuit.
This is America, you know? That's what I thought it was.
For the first time in U.S. history, a federal judge in the state of Florida deemed an album As Nasty as They Want to Be criminally obscene. He felt the music contained a morbid interest in sex, was sexually titillating, and provoked sexual arousal. Anyone who sells the album or sings their songs could land in jail. And that's just what happened when Two Live performed live in Broward County, Florida. Sheriffs stopped the concert and arrested the group on obscenity charges.
Obscenity is material which is raw sex and nothing but. No artistic content, no political speech contained therein, is clearly not protected by the First Amendment because it's harmful.
If we have to go to the Supreme Court and do basically the same thing the flag burning people did, that's what we're going to go at. Next thing you know, Madonna, she had to put her clothes on her and share, you know?
All we're talking about are some words, 5 four-letter words that end with K that gets everybody upset.
But the four-letter words weren't the only things that appalled some people. During the trial, the prosecution discovered that the album also contained 87 mentions of oral sex, 12 illustrations of violent sex, and a reference to incest.
It targets, in this instance, women for rape, and it mentally molests children. Luther Campbell is a mental child molester who is telling children that women ought to be raped.
That's all garbage, all garbage. We don't talk about no violent sex.
I certainly don't consider them pornographic. Are they vulgar, crude descriptions of sexual activities? Sure they are, but people use vulgar, crude descriptions of sexual activities all the time. If they say these same things in bed, it would be viewed as bedroom talk. So I don't see anything terrible about these words, and they're just words.
In court, the defense proclaimed that the First Amendment protects the group's artistic freedom to write and perform what they choose, that their records have warning labels on them, and that they consider the lyrics humorous rather than serious.
Thank the Lord for Kentucky Fried Chicken. You would have to know our culture in order to judge us, and those people in there don't know our culture.
In the end, the jury felt Two Live Crew's performance had artistic value and acquitted them. But in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, record store owner Charles Freeman wasn't so lucky. Freeman was the first person in U.S. history to be arrested and found guilty of selling Two Live Crew's album.
If anyone sells it and it is obscene, they'll go to jail. Simple as that.
I just felt it was unfair that they should direct this law in Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, against one group. If they would have came out against all the groups that use dirty lyrics, it would have been fine with me. But yet they directed it toward one in particular group, which is definitely wrong.
But unlike Two Live Crew, Freeman was sentenced to 1 year probation and a $1,000 fine.
What I think is most ironic about this situation is the fact that Charles Freeman, the first man convicted of distribution of obscene material for selling a record album to an adult, was this little record store owner in Broward County, and yet the group, the Two Live Crew, that's making quite a bit of money off all this publicity, was acquitted of similar types of charges.
The ACLU is appealing Freeman's case, but the trial has already been a financial disaster for his record business.
And just the controversy has cost you a lot of money, because as a person would walk into here before, now they may have second thought. There's too much controversy surrounding this record shop, so we may not want to go here. Let's go somewhere else and just forget about this.
But Two Live Crew's business doesn't seem to be hurting. They're back on the road making millions and living a lavish lifestyle.
We're successful black young men. How many is out there in America today? We're just another target, just like a whole lot of other black companies.
Although the federal judge's obscenity ruling on the As Nasty as They Want to Be album is under appeal, it still remains the only album to be banned in the USA. Despite the rappers beating the rap, Florida police are singing the same old song. They recently arrested a group called Too Much Joy for singing Two Live Crew's tunes. Just like Two Live Crew, the jury acquitted the rappers in just 13 minutes.
Trial Watch will be right back.
problem many of us have suffered. What can you do if your dry cleaner ruins an expensive outfit, Lisa?
It is a very common problem. The law says whenever you take something you own into a business, you have the right to expect it back in good condition. So if your cleaner is responsible for ruining an outfit, they are also responsible for paying you for it. That's true even if the cleaner posts a sign saying he won't pay more than a certain amount for damaged goods. To protect yourself, tell the cleaner in advance if you bring in a very expensive item. Otherwise, they're only responsible for the reasonable value of the garment, which may be much less than you paid for it. Also, examine your property before you leave the premises. That way you can prove that the damage occurred in the store, not in your home. If you discover a problem, complain only to the manager or the owner. If the person in charge isn't around, leave the item there with a message for the owner to contact you. Finally, you should keep your claim checks and your receipts for expensive items. Remember, a receipt is always your best evidence. If you can't work out a satisfactory agreement, you can always go to small claims court, but there is a small filing fee in small claims court, so you're usually better off if you can work it out with a company yourself. Most businesses need your business, and you'd be surprised how reasonable they can be, especially when you back up your complaint with evidence.
All righty, that is it for today. Join us again tomorrow for Trial Watch.